Howdy, everyone. This is Sharon for Self Care You podcast. And so, again, with this podcast, it's the intersection of self care, advocacy, and compassion for self caregivers. And I'm your host, Sharon, the number one self caregiver in the world. And so, today, our episode is the power of self care. And pretty much, and even though I say that, I would say it has to do with struggling. Um, Recently, I had the opportunity to view Chris Como um, podcast with Tyler Perry. And the name of that podcast is Transformative Power of Struggles and Suffering. And so it pretty much made me think about doing this particular episode and maybe the next two, because it goes into kind of like why this podcast is here in the first place. Initially, the name of it was the Inform Advocate podcast, meaning, as we're advocating for others, make sure we remember to advocate for ourselves. Because one thing that I've seen is that go you know, generally people as a whole would go out of their way to help and advocate for others, but also neglect themselves at the same time. And we can no longer do that because it's not sustainable for ourselves. And then it keeps up this vicious cycle where someone is taking care of someone else. I'm not saying that that's not needed at all, but this meaning when we're neglecting ourselves, when you're neglecting yourself, then it will add to someone else taking care of you, and then because of the stress that comes along with that. But going back to Tyler Perry and Chris Como's conversation, it's a conversation that's needed, and I would definitely encourage you all to listen to that particular podcast with Chris Como. His podcast is the Chris Como Project. And I felt that it was very in depth. Again, it's conversations that we don't have. And I know a lot of times, like on this podcast, I mean, I've talked about so many different things and I've had different guests. And I just really feel like the more that we hear about, especially in being well and how to get well, the more that we can, because of the fact there's so much suffering. And I really do believe there's some silent suffering. And then also there's a normalization of certain things as well. It's almost like I kind of almost feel like as a society, we've come to the conclusion that, oh, well, it's okay to suffer, even though you can say it's a part of life. But then it's like no one talks about it, and I don't know if there's any guilt or shame. And I can even think about even with myself when I've gone through certain things, and I don't well, I want to say I don't think there wasn't any guilt, but I can definitely say before I reached out for help, it was almost that sense of, oh, I don't want to bother others, especially when I know that someone may be dealing with something themselves. And so one of the points that they did make in that particular episode is like, everyone is suffering from something. And that kind of goes into my thing that I've always said, that we're all, need healing from something, even if you don't know it. And even though from that perspective, when I've said that, a lot of times I was referring more so to the childhood experiences that we may have, or just different experiences that kind of get stuck, and then we don't even know that it's there, but it's the driving seat of how we view life and how we're behaving and, the choices that we're making as well. And so, in saying that, Tyler was saying that, suffering is necessary. And pretty much what he was saying, and I hope I'm saying this right, Mr. Tyler, um, in that it's that necessary evil that's needed. It's almost like so you can, he didn't say it in these words, but pretty much it's for you to see the other side. And what I would say is in order for you to have success, and if you've been listening to the podcast, and especially with the Self Care U nuggets, I've been talking about like using self care for your internal success and even external success, because of the fact that it's those things that we can do to help ourselves. And so the other thing that they were talking about is the one thing that Tyler had mentioned is doing, even though it's like at the time you may not be able to look at it, but I would say through that process to be able to look at the suffering as a lesson. And one thing that I can say about that, and I can only use my own experience, and I want to say, and even in personal and professional conversations as well. And I think Oprah has even said something about it. It's kind of like, ugh, it's almost like you just can't escape it. It's like, I'm not sure if there's anyone in life at all who can escape going through something. And what I'm going to say about that too, it's not even your perception, because sometimes, because, oh, well, that's their perception, that's not how it happened, especially if two people experience something, one, not one against the other, but more so one will say, oh, well, that's your perception of how you see the situation. And the other will pretty much say the same thing. That may and may not be the case, but at the end of the day, someone has gone through something, and it could be both parties could have experienced something. And so, in saying all of that, pretty much kind of going back to myself, it's like, I'm like, why did it wait to the, you know, later in life? And so, in saying that, I'm like, gosh, I wish I would have has certain experiences much earlier in life. And the reason that I say that, because it gives you those lessons. And then not only that, it's the character. I was talking to one of my friends lately, and even though I have been talking about this as well, but when they use the word character, I thought, oh, yeah, that's the word that I've been looking for. Pretty much when I'm saying, it's kind of like the internal success. It's like what characteristics of ourselves are being built. And again, for those of you who have been following me, and especially with Self Care U Nugget, and then it was previously Conscious Sharing and Conscious Sharing moments, I definitely have talked about this. It's kind of like we need the interactions of others to help build us, to help expand us. And that's pretty much how life is as well, because especially for individuals who have children and grandchildren and even godchildren, and it's like, because of the feelings that we have had or the experiences that we have had, we don't want our loved ones to experience it. And this is true. But one thing I will say about that, and this is not even just for children, really from anyone, is that, and I always, you've heard me say this, aside from abuse and neglect, or assault, aside from that, pretty much everything else in life, and I want to say no matter how hard it is or the struggle, We need that so that we can be the best version of ourselves. And it does build, the character. It's almost like the only thing I can say, like for myself, with an experience that I've had, what it made me do, I was like, oh, okay, here I am talking about self care and how am I taking care of myself. And so it's pretty much in making difficult decisions that may not be, like you just say, pleasing to others, in that you stand in your ground of whatever decision that is. And so this is what these experiences give us, because there's no other way around it. It's almost kind of like, I say this because, like, majority of the time, I speak in a very positive way, and then sometimes when I'm trying to make a point, it's like no one understands. And so then I feel like, oh, okay, I need to say this. It's almost like most people only understand just the negative connotations of things. And so I've learned, depends on who I'm talking to, I may, pretty much saying something in a positive way, or kind of like being nice about it. The point doesn't get across. And I think a lot of times people in general kind of feel that way. So that may be why they speak the way that they speak. And so, in saying all of that, is in saying that, again, we need these experiences in order to it. And even when we use the word to strengthen us, it's not to the strength of itself. It's more so to build the characters, to build, let's just say, if need to have a little bit more assertiveness, a little bit more. I mean, even though we want to say patient, that too. But it's like whatever those things that we need to learn so that we can become the best version of ourselves, and to be able to handle, for example, we talk about want to be a millionaire, but there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with that. Like anything in leadership, even when it comes to being a parent or making, the decisions that you need to make, especially when it impacts others. And so, again, when it comes to, I would definitely say, no one is exempt for the difficulty of life. And then we need those things, so that, I like to say, so that in later in life, when things come down, we will be able to manage. We will be able to, the our resilience is a little bit more achievable, that it really helps with that. And of course, you never know that until you're in it, right? And then the other thing that was talked about in that particular episode of the podcast, in that they talked about, of course, where when it comes to like expressing yourself and then not sharing that you're suffering and that you're struggling, and because a lot of times we do not say anything about it. Now, one thing I will say, and I've talked about it before on the podcast, as well as the Self Care U Nuggets, in that it pretty much seems like it's, again, it's kind of like we need these experiences to help us along the way of life. And then when it comes to suppressing those things, is that never is going to help us if we suppress any of that. That's all I can say. Anytime feelings, emotions, or anything get ignored, avoided, suppressed, whatever word you want to use, is implode, explode, and just never good for anybody, especially for you. And so in saying that, it's like, how much are we able to moving. Like some people may look at it as you're dodging, but I wouldn't say that. It's like you're making those necessary adjustments. And, so pretty much it's kind of like life is like water, and how can you move along the way? Because again, the storms of life are going to come. And the more that we're able, to really go towards, instead of going against the grain, but go towards it, so that you'll be able to handle those things. The other thing is that they were saying something. Now I can't remember exactly what was said, but even I would say in going through life, and especially when you're having loved ones, it's like we all when it comes to our parents, each parent is different. And one thing I can say about my mom is that she was more of, she provided the guidance, but she definitely allowed a lot of freedom. And so, and all that I can say is for each person is different. Sometimes some people need a little bit more, I guess you say, guidance. Sometimes some individuals need a little bit less. But one thing I can say, in that, like when it comes to tough love, it's like that is always one that kind of comes up to for debate. And what I can say, because with one of my friends, I would say they're always challenging and sometimes testing me, and then I'm like, I haven't learned yet. But then in the middle of something, of our discussion, or even my own reaction, which is not a response, I'm like, oh, okay, that's that. I call it wax on and wax off, meaning that when things come in life, it's like, do we get heated about it? How do we, are we responding, or are you reacting to it? And so, what are the things that you can do in order to really to be able to manage, the storms of life, where they want, because I mean, where they will not interfere and get you off your balance, at least not as much. Okay. And again, all of this takes practice as well. And the one thing I want to say about that is that when it comes to the wax on, wax off, it's like everybody's familiar, at least I'm saying, everybody should be familiar with the movie The Karate Kid, and the original Karate Kid, when Daniel was washing the car, and pretty much it was the wax on, wax off, and he just cannot understand why he need to do that. And it's kind of like it's a method to the madness. And so that kind of comes along with a lot of different things in life. It's like we may not be able to understand its purpose, or why you may not be able to understand its purpose, or why you're going through something. But that is where the wax on and wax off, where either you're telling yourself you're getting downloads, or it's the suggestions or instructions or directions of someone else, encouraging you to do such and such, such. And you're able to do that. And especially if you're able to do it without question, because that's the not so easy part, is like, either whatever it is, I'm going to say, whatever it is that's guiding you to be able to do something, and you may not have that understanding at the time, but then as time goes on, you're like, oh, okay, there is a lesson in all of this. And so what I have seen, especially when it comes to the business world, and when it really comes to success, the internal and the external, is that wax on and wax off is real. And so we really do need that. And another way of thinking about it too is that when you think about the 8 limbs of yoga, is all of those intricate parts that's needed. And with the challenges of life is what allows us to get there. And so I like to say no one is exempt, degreed or not. And when I say degreed, this meaning individuals who have gone to school and have a degree, because sometimes I believe that society has a certain perception. I'm degreed, and it doesn't exempt me from anything. The other thing is that with our life experiences, it also sets the ground to our perception of experiences. And that's one of the things they were kind of talking about as well. The example that they had used in that particular episode is that, people can be in the same family and but can have completely different viewpoint of what has happened. So it's almost like the vantage point of an experience. And we've all experienced that. I mean, even like two people can be have the same interaction but come out of it with two totally viewpoint. And you know that comes from, and we can't just say it's the life experiences. It's pretty much just coming from the viewpoint of the person, of the life experience, of how it impact. Because again, someone can be side by side with an event, experience the same thing, but the outcome can be completely different. So is it truly the experience itself, or pretty much how that particular being perceives that? And pretty much it's like we talked about the nervous system is how it impacts the nervous system. So when saying that with those vibrations, for each person, it can vibrate differently. And so one thing that Tyler talked about it is sitting in discomfort, and it's pretty much sitting in the discomfort and letting it build so that you can move through it. He might have didn't say that last part, but I did. But that's pretty much my interpretation of what it was meant. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, and also the Steph Curry You Nuggets, I've talked about, it's pretty much, feel what you feel and move on. And even though I'm saying that, but there have been parts of me and it's like, oh, how come I'm stagnated here? You know what I mean? And so again, when it comes to this podcast, it's so that you're able to move, to be able to identify and recognize different parts of yourself at different moments in your life, and to say, hey, there is a way that you can overcome and come on the other side. And the other thing is, one thing that I did like, there was one example of Chris talking about when he was, it wasn't skiing, it was some other event. But anyway, and the coach that he had, it was like, oh, you'll get better. And that is something to remember. And actually, that particular affirmation came from Tyler's son, who had experience with basketball, and in which, initially he wasn't as good as he thought, but then, I can't remember if he was saying it or Tyler was saying, but I say it was said that he would get better. And that's the thing when it comes to all of us. And this is the whole purpose of the self-care. No matter where you are in life, you will get better. You are better. And just really open up your eyes, open up your ears, open up your heart and your mind, because there's so many different things out there. There's too many people who are making it big. And when I say making it big, meaning that they have come against the odds in life. There are individuals out there who had tremendous abuse, tremendous trauma but they still come out on the other side. And of course, we know it's the flip side of that. But my whole point is saying if one person can do it, others can as well. And so there's so many choices that you have of getting well, of being well mentally, physically, spiritually, and even financially. And they are so tied together. They are tied together, tied together. I don't think I really realized they were tied together until I started learning more so about, money and finances and, mindset when it comes to money and just what you don't know. And so, in saying all of that, when it comes to your struggle, know that you're not alone and that it is a part of life so that you can swim in it, but not stay in it because you are going to get better because you are better. And so definitely remember to like and share this podcast. And I almost forgot because I was so busy in the conversation, is to remind you of the Rest, Rejuvenate, and Recover self-care apps, which is tailor-made for busy leaders and professionals. And so you can go to Bit.ly, RRR, practices, so that you can put these self-care apps in your toolbox, because this is how we're going to get well. It's like throughout the day when you are stressed, and then there's a breathing technique that you can do. You can go walking, or you can do a muscle relaxation, or you can listen to music, or you can move. So there's so many different things that you can do so you can be well throughout the day, whether you're at home or you're at work. And so again, thank you for listening to this episode of Self Care You Podcast.